Hello dear students, myself Dr. Sachin Gurule, Assistant Professor from Department of Zoology, KTHM College, Nasik. In the previous video of entomology first belongs to chapter morphology of insect, we have already completed the two classical kind of the mouth parts which is found in insect, that is the chewing or mandibulate type and their types, and second classical mouth parts we have studied, that is piercing and sucking kind of mouth parts, and we have also discussed the four subtypes of that PSM mouth parts. Now today in this video we are going to learn the three another type of mouth parts which is found in an insect. First one is a sponging mouth part, second one is a siphoning mouth part, and third one is chewing and lapping mouth parts. So let's see first of all one by one the sponging kind of the mouth parts. The sponging mouth parts is a peculiarity of the dipteran insect, and they are found into the insect commonly known as the houseflies. The sponging mouthparts are incapable of piercing the skin and found in adult mucoid diptera, which is commonly known as the houseflies. The mandibles are completely wanting or absent, so there is no mandible. So this mouth part is only contributed by the labrum, maxillae, labium, and hypopharynx. So there is no mandible. So feeding apparatus is known as the proboscis. So this whole structure is referred as the proboscis. In this diagram you can see, so this is referred as the proboscis. This proboscis is composite structure actually and formed by the labrum, hypopharynx and the labium. Means three appendages of the mouth part, that is labrum, then hypopharynx and the labium. These three structures are responsible for forming a composite structure known as the proboscis. The proboscis is anteriorly associated with the maxillary palpi. So here you can see the anterior region, it is associated with the maxillary palpi, and distally it bears a labellar lobes. The labillae are the broad, soft pad with the prestomal teeth which can be rasped the food substances. Now whole this proboscis is differentiated into the three parts. The basal part is referred as the rostrum, the middle part is known as the hostelum, and the distal most part is known as the pseudotrachea. So in this way the whole proboscis is divisible into the three parts, that is rostrum, middle hostelum, and the distal one is the pseudotrachea. The rostrum is also referred as the basiproboscis, as is the basal part of the proboscis, hence it is also referred as the basiproboscis, which bears only the maxillary palpi. Broad is a broad innervated cone having a flexible membranous wall. So they are having a flexible membranous wall and it is forming the basal part of the proboscis, which is referred as the rostrum. The hostelum is a middle part and it is also referred as a mediproboscis, which is the middle part, hence referred as a mediproboscis. It is cylindrical. Posterior wall of the hostelum is occupied by a prominent plate. That prominent plate is referred as the mentum, which is the part of labium. Then anterior surface is covered by a long tapering, strongly sclerotized flap of the labrum. So this is the flap of the labrum which is covering the anterior surface of the mediproboscis, or so called as the hostelum. Then beneath the labrum lies a blade like hypopharynx. So this is a hypopharynx which is blade like structure, and the third part or the distal most part of the proboscis is referred as the pseudotrachea, or it is also referred as a distiproboscis, as it is located at the distal portion, hence is referred as the distiproboscis. It is formed by the labillae or the oral suckers. The food canal lies between the labrum and hypopharynx. So this is the labrum and this one is the hypopharynx, and within this labrum and hypopharynx there is a food canal leading to the functional mouth. This functional mouth is situated behind the base of labrum. So here at the base of labrum, the functional mouth is located. The maxillae are represented only by this maxillary pulp, while other structures, that is gallia, lacinia, they are completely absent. So it is only represented by the maxillary pulpi. The labium occurs as a non-piercing, spongy, broad pads only, and is going to form the composite structure, the proboscis. So they forms the oval disc which is crossed by the pseudotracheal channels here in this diagram. So these are the pseudotrachea, and you can able to observe the pseudotracheal canals in this image. Also you can able to notice the canals are there, which is referred as the pseudotracheal canals, and they are enclosing centrally an opening of the posterior cleft between the component lobes. So these are the two lobes, and in between the two lobes a small opening is there, which is the main collecting channel. This main collecting channels inward, it is communicating with the food channel, and so that whatever food material is that is going to approach the functional mouth, or the main part, the functional mouth, which is resides at the basal region of the labrum, and then it is sucked into the proximal part of the alimentary canal known as the stomodium. So these are the features of the sponging kind of mouth part, which is found into the houseflies, or the peculiarity of the mucoid dipteran insects. So let's see the feeding mechanism. The extension of this proboscis is carried out by a direct action of retractor muscles, and these retractor muscles are lodged in a head capsule, and the air pressure which is developed at the transfer of air from the thoracic air sacs to the rostral air sac. So this is a rostral region which is provided with a air sac from the inner side, which is communicated with the thoracic air sac. So elongation or extension of this proboscis can be brought about by the pressing the air, or air pressure, which is responsible for transferring the air from the thoracic sacs into the rostral air sacs, so that the extension can be achieved. The extension of the proboscis, that is rostral protraction, is maintained by a long time by a rostral retractor muscles, and it is get relaxed during the resting situation. So the food uptake is carried out by the lamellar lobes through a fine cuticular canals, and the pseudotrachea, they are supported by incomplete chitinous rings leaving the narrow fissure communicating between the canals and the oral surface of the labia. This fissure is closed during the feeding. The functional communication to the surface is made via a small opening or the interbifid spaces lying at the end of short tube, also called as a groove, which extending laterally from that of the pseudotrachea. So these are the pseudotrachea which has the grooves from which it is responsible for making a functional communication between the food and the obviously the mouth part. Then after, whatever food material is there, that is in the solid state or in the solid semi-solid state, so via the salivary gland, it pours a saliva on the food material, which is responsible for dissolving that food material or converted either into the semi liquid paste or into the liquid state. And then after, these pseudotracheal canals are responsible for absorbing this food material, which goes into the food canal, and from the food canal it approaches to the functional mouth, and from the functional mouth it enters into the proximal part of the alimentary canal, that is the stomodium. Now it opens into the collecting channels by intern opening around the oral aperture between the lamellar lobe. At the resting condition, this proboscis is coiled tightly, while during the feeding it is uncoiled. Now this mechanism actually is controlled by the three type of forces. The first force is contributed by the elasticity of the proboscis, which is elastic. Hence, the elasticity is responsible for that movement of the proboscis, or contraction, or so-called as a coiling. Then second one is a hydrostatic pressure of the hemolymph. So whatever hemolymph is there, the hydrostatic pressure is created to again coil that proboscis, and the third factor or the third force is the tension from the intrinsic muscles of the proboscis. So these musculature are responsible for coiling the proboscis when they are in a non-feeding state. So this is the mechanism of the food feeding in case of the sponging kind of the mouth parts. So this is about the sponging mouth part. Then second one is the siphoning type of mouth part. In the siphoning type of mouth parts is a peculiarity of the lepidopteran insect, which is found into the adults of the butterflies and the moths. Here, in case of this kind of mouthpart, the labrum is reduced as a narrow transverse band. So here you can see this is a narrow transverse band which is representing the labrum, and this labrum obviously it is get fused with that of the clypeus of the head. So this is a clypeal region, it is get fused with the clypeus. Then maxillary pulpi remains rudimentary and mandibles are usually entirely absent or wanting, or it is ill defined into the lower lepidoptera. So as there is no mandibles, so there is no process of mastication into the adult, or even they cannot able to pierce the skin or the epidermis of the host, because the mandibles are completely lacking into the lepidopteran insect. The labium is represented only by three segmented large scaly labial pulpi, which is a characteristic feature of the Lepidoptera. So labium is only represented by these three segmented labial pulpi, and remaining structure again is undergoes a reduction. The maxillae are the main body organ of the mouthpart belongs to the Lepidoptera of the siphoning type. The gallia are greatly elongated, and both of the either side are jointed to form a slender hollow tube by a ventral hook and dorsal plate and intrinsic oblique muscles. So whatever proboscis is there, that proboscis is actually contributed by the maxillae. And among the maxillae, the gallia is extremely elongated, and the gallia of the either side, that is right and left side, they are interposing one another, and which are joined with the help of the ventral hook, dorsal plate and intrinsic oblique muscles, which is responsible for forming a hollow tube, and this hollow tube is contributing the formation of the food canal. The food canal is formed from the concave wall of the opposed gallia, that is lumen of the tube, and the tube is coiled up under the head like a watch spring when it is non-functional or not in use. So it functions like a flexible metal tubing, hence, which is a characteristic feature. The muscles occupies entire length of each half of the proboscis, which serves to coil the proboscis during the non-feeding state. So at the whole entire length of this proboscis, the muscles are there, and due to the presence of muscles, they can able to coil the proboscis when in a non-feeding state. The proboscis is internally provided with a small muscles, and it is incapable of piercing the skin or the tissue of the plant. Now feeding is accompanied by uncoiling this tube and projecting the tip into the some exposed hair or nectary from the nectaries of the flower, and then sucking the liquid up through a food canal which runs through a proboscis. So in this way, whatever liquid nectar is there, which is drawn into the proximal part of the stomodium. Then they are also provided with a pumping organ. This pumping organ in case of the siphoning mouth part is form of anterior part of the stomodium, which is the modification of buccopharyngeal region. So buccopharyngeal region is responsible for forming a pumping organ, or through which they can able to suck their food material through the food canal into the stomodium. Now it is a large bulb-like structure with a strongly muscular wall lying in the anterior part of the head, Then it opens on the base of proboscis through a narrow neck, and it is dorsolaterally innervated by two thick paired dilator muscles of the frons. So the lepidopteran insect also provided with a pumping organ, which is the modification of buccopharyngeal region into the stomodial part through which they suck the food material. So here the mechanism is very simple. So this one is a proboscis. This is a part of the gallia. These gallia are interconnected and which are forming a halo structure which is responsible for forming a halo tube known as the food canal. So this is about the siphoning kind of mouth part. Example is adult lepidopteran insect, butterfly and moth. Then the next variety of mouth part is chewing and lapping mouth part. Now this kind of the mouth part is a peculiarity of the hymenopteran insect, which is commonly known as the honeybees. Now organization of the labrum and mandible, it is constituting a chewing part. So this is a labrum and these are the mandible. These are forming a chewing part, while the maxillae and labium. So this is the maxillae and this one is the labium, which is forming a lapping tongue, or which is united or closely united forming a lapping tongue. So the chewing and lapping, which is contributed by two appendages. Chewing part contributed by labrum plus mandible, while the lapping part is contributed by the fusion of the maxillae and the labium. So both maxillae and the labium are suspended from the cranium and are articulated to it chiefly via the basis of maxillae only. So this is the basal part of the maxillae, which is obviously referred as the cardo. So to that cardo, this labium is going to attach, so which is the basal part. The pair of labial pulpi are a long and a conspicuous structure. So here you can see, so these are the labial pulp, which are the highly developed structure or the conspicuous structure. A pair of maxillary pulpi, they are reduced or they are very small as compared to the labial pulp. Usually the maxillary pulpi are longer than that of the labial pulp, but here the labial pulp are enormously developed, while the maxillary pulpi, they are becomes a very small. The glossa of the labium is greatly elongated to form a hairy, flexible tongue that can be rapidly protracted and retracted to reach into a deep nectaries of the tubular flower. So this is the part of the labium and is a part of the glossa. This glossa is extremely elongated. Again, the glossa from the either side, right and left, they are responsible for forming a ligula, or which is referred as the proboscis. The food canal is formed by the concave inner surface of the gallia, concave surface of the gallia. So these are the gallia when they are closely allied with one another, and it is roofing over the glossa and fitting singly lengthwise against the labial pulpi, in which tube lies tightly against the side of glossa. Means the food canal in case of this kind of mouth part is contributed by the gallia, then these are the labial pulpi and obviously the glossa, which these are come closed with one another, and the ventral part of the gallia is leaving a some sort of the canal which can be used as the food canal. So this is the peculiarity of this mouth part. Now bees thrust out the glossa, so called as tongue. So that glossy is also referred as a tongue, and it is responsible for licking the nectars with its tip. The glossa smears up the nectar rapidly and is retracted between the labial pulp and the gallia. The nectar is squeezed off the tongue by the glossy and is deposited so as to accumulate in a small cavity which is formed by the paraglossy at the base of glossa. So this is the paraglossa, which are forming a some sort of a small cavity. So this small cavity is acting as a space where the nectar which is squeezed by this tongue is temporarily stored. Then by the bending of labium upwards near the mid length, the base of the glossa is brought into the close opposition of the mouth cavity, that is food canal, and accumulated nectar is then sucked into the esophagus by the action of pharyngeal pump. So they are also provided with a well-developed pharyngeal pump which is responsible for creating a pressure with which the suction pressure the food is get sucked into the esophagus. So for that purpose, so this part, that is the tongue, is get bent at the middle region, and then after the food canal which is formed by this gallia and the labial part is communicating with a small cavity in which that nectar is poured by that tongue, and then after it is sucked into the oral cavity. The liquid food ascend by the capillary action through the ventral canal of the glossa. The ventral canal of the glossa serves as a salivary groove to conduct a saliva from the salivary duct, which is discharged at the tip of tongue, where it may be used to dissolve the solids such as the sugars. The mandibles are vestigial, actually means the mandibles are not concerned with the any feeding mechanism, but that mandibles are useful for carrying the things like a pollen grains, and it is also useful for molding the wax into the cell for constructing their nest. Means mandible are not at all involved into the process of feeding, and hence it is only giving a function of chewing, which is useful for building their comb, which is made up of the waxy material. So this is about the chewing and lapping kind of mouth parts which is found into the honeybees. Then the last part of this head region of the insect, that is degenerative and filter feeding mouth parts. Now, degenerative or filter feeding mouthparts is found into the many larvae of the insect. For example, the larvae of Nematocera, larvae of Cyclorapha, they are provided with such a kind of degenerative or filter feeding mouthparts. They are also found into the larval stages of the Diptera, such as the uh, mosquito, and it is also found into the larvae of the Ephemeroptera. So let's see, first of all, the larvae of aquatic Nematocera. So this diagram is representing a mouthparts of the aquatic Nematocera. The true mouthparts are entirely lacking in the larvae of the Nematocera. The external mouthparts are forms a brush-like structure that brings a current of water and suspended particle into the pharynx. The pharynx is developed into the pump and is provided with the internal screen, and the comb-like screen are closely arranged with the spacing that permits the removal of very fine suspended material. So in case of the Neuroptera, the basic appendages belongs to the mouthparts are absent, and their head region in a proximal part they are provided with such a kind of the feeding brush, and these feeding brush are useful for bring about or the formation of the water current in which their food material or the food particle is get trapped and which is then sucked into the pharynx. So this is the peculiarity of the filter feeding or the degenerative mouthparts in case of the Nematocera. Now in case of the larvae of Cyclorapha bears a mouth hook. This mouth hook, they are attached to the permanent pharyngeal scleret. So this is a pharyngeal scleret, and the hook like structure is developed in case of the cycloraphan. The mouth hook moves parallel to each other in a tearing motion. Some flies such as the Musca domestica and Stomoex calcitrans, they have only a single mouth hook. The true mouth parts are wanting here again. The original appendages which forming the mouth part, they are again absent, and instead the hooks are get developed and which are permanently attached to the pharyngeal scleret. The hypopharynx, clypeus and associated parts are, and the sclerets of the head collectively forms the cephalopharyngeal skeleton. So this kind of the modification is found into the cycloraphan. And filter feeding mouth part occurs in some aquatic larvae which filter the suspended particle matter from the water, which are aquatic one, with the help of fan, combs, brush or sieves which can be found into the Diptera and Ephemeroptera, or it may have the spoon silk net which is found into the insect belongs to the Trichoptera. Now, in case of the mosquito larvae, they are equipped with the filtering apparatus which consists of the three brushes, two are lateral and one median on the labrum. Then combs of mandibles and the maxillae, they are also present, and bristles and the brushes on the epipharynx. So all these three structures, that is the brushes on the labrum, combs of the mandible and maxillae, and bristle of the epipharynx, they are responsible for forming a water current in which the food particle is get trapped, and after that it is get sucked or it is can withdrawn into the oral cavity. So this is generally the mechanism, and the modification can be found in some insect where their principal appendages of the mouth parts are lacking, and instead they are developed into the brush like structure, and such a kind of the mouth parts are referred as the degenerative or the filter feeding mouth parts. So with this we have completed with the types of mouth parts in an insect, and with this topic we have completed the head part of the insect belongs to the morphology of insect. Thank you very much.